Upon awakening in the intensive care unit, the wealthy man overheard his wife's phone conversation. Upon learning about the will, he pretended to be dead. Matthew woke up immediately, as if an invisible switch had been flipped, restoring his consciousness. Despite his unresponsive body, he managed to crack his eyes open slightly and noticed he was in a brightly lit room that made him squint. Where am I, and why does my body feel so weak and powerless? How did I even get here? He muttered. The answer to his question came in the form of a faint squeak from various sensors and devices a couple of meters away from the bed. Matthew strained his consciousness again and realized he was in a hospital room. But how did I get here, and what exactly happened? The dazzling light overhead hindered his concentration, and a buzzing in his ears made it sound like an alarm was ringing in his mind. His consciousness was immediately pierced by a severe bout of pain, causing him to groan softly. Suddenly, Matthew felt an intense thirst, but there was no one to give him water right now, and there was no water within arm's reach either. There was no doubt this was indeed a hospital room, but why was there so much equipment here? Matthew had never been to such medical facilities before, so he had nothing to compare with. Threads from IV drips and various sensors trailed away from his hands, and his body felt completely weightless. He didn't have enough strength to fully open his eyes, so he could only glimpse the world through slits. At first, the sound seemed so muffled and distant that Matthew doubted he could hear anything at all. But then, a very familiar voice sounded nearby, making his heart flutter with excitement. It was his wife Lisa's voice. Yes, there was no doubt the same intonation and a slight catch in the pronunciation of some phrases gave her away completely. Matthew suddenly tensed, trying to signal Lisa in some way when he heard the sound of the door opening. The businessman gathered himself, expecting to hear anything but this. Dr. Merritt, hello. Please tell me, how is my husband doing? Will he lie like a vegetable for long and suffer? Perhaps it's worth resorting to more radical measures, Lisa asked, adding a more plaintive tone to her voice. There was a tense pause in the room for a moment, and then the attending physician replied, I'll give you one piece of advice. Don't anger God. Hope for the best. Your husband doesn't have much of a chance, but you can't give up. I also advise you to spend less time near him to avoid the possibility of accidentally infecting him with any infection. In case of any progress in treatment, you will be immediately informed. But for now, I strongly urge you to leave the room. Okay, of course you're right. Forgive me. I understand everything, Lisa sang in a syrupy voice. Shortly after, Matthew heard the receding footsteps and the sound of a closing door, from which he concluded that the female doctor had left while Lisa remained standing by his bedside, lost in her own thoughts. Suddenly, the businessman distinctly discerned the melodious trill of a telephone ring in the intensive care unit. It sounded so unnatural that it made him doubt the reality of everything happening. He never liked eavesdropping and considered it a shameful and unworthy act for someone of his status. After all, he was the owner of one of the best restaurants in the city. If Matthew were healthy right now, he would have definitely left the room and let Lisa speak without witnesses. But since he couldn't do that, he had to listen to everything from beginning to end. Hello, darling. Is that you? Your number seemed unfamiliar. Did you get a new one again? A will? Yes, I've written it, of course. Where will it go? Yes, I've already read it. Everything's just as I wanted, thanks to the notary. Reviewed it, true. Not for free, of course, but you have to pay for everything. Yes, you know that. After his wife's words, Matthew's heart raced with furious speed. Who is Lisa talking to so sweetly? She's not even speaking, just icing. Is that even possible? And what exactly is she talking about? This will. But what she said next finally dispelled all doubts. Yes, darling, I've just come into the room. Well, what can I say? My dear lies there like a vegetable. In general, no changes. I think, based on this, I'll be able to manage the restaurant as I see fit, and when Matthew is no longer there, then I'll inherit it as it should be. Well, I'll go now. Still have things to do, and I love you. Well, goodbye for now. Such audacity left Matthew breathless. It's incomprehensible, talking about her husband's imminent departure in his presence, and even calling him a vegetable. Did he deserve such treatment? Meanwhile, Lying on the hospital bed, Matthew stubbornly couldn't understand why the sensors, which were supposed to inform the medical staff that he had regained consciousness, hadn't worked. He had seen something like this in one of the domestic movies. He couldn't remember the title, but the essence had been etched into his memory forever. However, it's one thing to observe from the sidelines, and quite another to be the one involved, especially when your spouse has just betrayed you so easily. And Matthew had no doubt that betrayal had occurred. But who saved him from the engulfing flames of the car? Who dared to risk their own life for him? At that moment, consciousness clouded, returning him on the waves of memory to the event that occurred on that fateful day. The morning of the elite restaurant owner, Matthew Williams, began as usual, hardly different from all the previous ones. As usual, he got up with the first rays of the sun when most of the city's inhabitants were still peacefully snoozing in their beds. From the windows of his house, there was an excellent view of the city, which was just beginning to settle into its usual daily routine. First, Matthew made himself breakfast, simple yet delicious and nutritious. He poured himself orange juice and quickly fried eggs with bacon. Then he spent a few minutes doing gymnastics to fully awaken his body and get his muscles back to normal. Trying to lead a healthy lifestyle, he never insisted on his views and never forced his spouse to follow his example. Everyone is different, and Lisa was no exception. Matthew, for example, was a vegetarian and didn't consume animal products. At the same time, he understood perfectly well that he had no right to judge people who ate meat. Taking a tray with prepared breakfast, Matthew stepped out onto the spacious terrace and sat down at the table. Due to winter, the terrace was enclosed with a small fireplace crackling in the corner. Enjoying the fresh morning air and silence, he thought about the plans for the day to make sure he could accomplish everything that was planned. Matthew had given her permission, but today felt different. As she reached the door, Lisa intercepted her, her face twisted with anger. "And where do you think you're going with that?" Lisa demanded, pointing at the bag in Kayla's hands. Kayla's face flushed. "These are just some leftovers. Mr. Williams said it was okay." "Mr. Williams is in the hospital," Lisa snapped. "And I run things now. You think you can just take whatever you want?" Kayla's eyes widened with fear and confusion. "No, ma'am, he said I could." Lisa cut her off, her voice cold and stern. "From now on, you take nothing without my explicit permission. Understand?" Kayla nodded quickly, tears welling up in her eyes. She handed the bag to Lisa, who snatched it away with a sneer. "Now get out of here before I decide to fire you." Kayla hurried out, leaving Lisa standing triumphantly in the doorway. Lisa felt a rush of power and satisfaction. She turned to Andrew, who was watching from a distance. "That's how you handle employees," she said smugly. Andrew nodded, a sly smile on his face. "You're absolutely right, Mrs. Williams. Absolutely right." As Lisa continued to assert her dominance over the restaurant, Matthew's condition in the hospital remained precarious. Despite the doctors' and nurses' best efforts, he was still weak and bedridden. However, his determination to survive and expose his wife's betrayal kept him fighting. Back at the restaurant, Lisa's harsh management style began to take its toll on the staff. Morale plummeted, and the once harmonious workplace turned into a hostile environment. Employees whispered amongst themselves, sharing stories of Lisa's cruelty and unfair treatment. The head chef, who had been reprimanded earlier, started to look for other job opportunities, realizing that working under Lisa was untenable. Kayla, meanwhile, struggled to maintain her composure. Her visions continued to haunt her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. One evening, after another exhausting day at work, she decided to visit Matthew in the hospital. She needed to warn him about Lisa and her suspicions. When she arrived, she found Matthew alone in his room, eyes closed but clearly conscious. She hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. "Mr. Williams," she whispered. "It's me, Kayla. I need to talk to you." Matthew's eyes fluttered open, and he looked at her with a mixture of surprise and relief. "Kayla, what are you doing here?" "I had to come," she said urgently. "There's something you need to know. It's about your wife." Matthew's expression darkened. "Lisa? What about her?" Kayla took a deep breath, steadying herself. She's been taking over the restaurant, treating everyone terribly, and I think she might be planning something worse." Matthew's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? I overheard her talking to Andrew about surveillance cameras and watching the staff. She's looking for reasons to fire people, to control everything. And Kayla hesitated, tears filling her eyes. And I had a vision, Mr. Williams, a vision of you in danger. Matthew listened intently, his mind racing. He knew Kayla's visions had been eerily accurate before. If she was warning him now, he couldn't ignore it. What should I do? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kayla reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. You need to get out of here. You need to protect yourself and the restaurant, and you need to expose Lisa for what she truly is. Matthew nodded slowly, determination filling his heart. You're right. I need to act, but I can't do it alone. I'll help you, Kayla said firmly. Whatever you need, I'm here for you. With Kayla's support, Matthew began to formulate a plan. He would need to gather evidence against Lisa, prove her malicious intent, and take back control of his life and his business. It wouldn't be easy, but with Kayla by his side, he knew he could do it. As the days passed, Kayla continued to visit Matthew, helping him recover and keeping him informed about the situation at the restaurant. They worked together in secret, careful not to arouse Lisa's suspicion. Slowly but surely, Matthew's strength returned, and with it, his resolve to reclaim what was rightfully his. Finally, the day came when Matthew was ready to confront Lisa. He had gathered enough evidence to expose her and had the support of the loyal staff who had suffered under her rule. With Kayla by his side, he walked into the restaurant, determined to set things right. Lisa was in the office, going through some paperwork when Matthew and Kayla entered. She looked up, shock and anger flashing across her face. Matthew, what are you doing here? You should be in the hospital. I'm here to take back what's mine, Matthew said firmly, and to expose you for the deceitful, manipulative person you are. Lisa's eyes narrowed. You have no proof of anything. Matthew held up a folder, filled with documents and recordings. I have all the proof I need, and so does the staff. You're done, Lisa. Realizing she had been caught, Lisa's expression turned venomous. You think you can just walk in here and take everything back? You're a fool, Matthew. A fool. Maybe, Matthew said calmly. But I'm a fool who knows the truth. And now, so does everyone else. With that, he handed the folder to the head chef, who had been waiting outside. The staff gathered around, reading the evidence and nodding in agreement. Lisa's reign of terror was over. As she was escorted out of the restaurant, Lisa's eyes met Matthew's one last time. This isn't over, Matthew. You'll regret this. Matthew watched her go, feeling a sense of relief and closure. Maybe, but at least now I can start rebuilding what you tried to destroy. With Lisa gone, the restaurant slowly began to return to its former glory. The staff, now free from her oppressive rule, worked together harmoniously, creating an atmosphere of trust and cooperation once more. Matthew, with Kayla's continued support, focused on making the restaurant even better than before. And as for Kayla, she found a new sense of purpose and belonging. Her visions, once a source of fear and confusion, had led her to help someone in need and make a real difference in their life. She and Matthew became close friends, united by their shared experiences and a determination to overcome the challenges they had faced. In the end, Matthew's journey was one of resilience and redemption. He had faced betrayal and danger, but with the help of true friends and his own inner strength, he had emerged victorious. And as he looked around at the bustling, thriving restaurant, he knew that brighter days were ahead.